Hey everybody, so we are going to move on and cover, still covering Standard 4 about the American Revolution, but on this lesson we're going to specifically look at the reason for and the significance, the importance of the fact that France is going to be an ally to the colonies during the American Revolution, and why France decides to help the colonies and some other assistance we get from other countries, and how Benjamin Franklin and John Adams play a really important role in getting those foreign countries to come help the colonists during the American Revolution. So you got to understand, when the American Revolution starts, we're in it now, right? We know we're going to war. You got to imagine how the colonies felt, right? England is the most powerful nation in the world. They have the most powerful navy, the most powerful army, more money, better equipped, right? And here the colonists with their little militias, right, are going to try to go to war. And that's kind of scary, right? So what happens is the colonists start trying to put out feelers to see if there are any foreign countries that are willing to come to the colonies' aid. And they're going to send two guys over to France, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, who are really going to spend the majority of the time of the American Revolution in Europe trying to get these countries to assist us, whether it be through weapons or money or loans or whatever it is. One of our best friends for the American Revolution is going to be France, okay? Later on, the Netherlands or the Dutch are going to give us our first loan, but we're going to talk about the French first. And you got to know that France, who has a king, right? They're not looking at the colonies like, here we are trying to break up with a king, but we want to come to a country who also has a king and get them to help us. So that was kind of weird, right? But the thing you got to remember is, who was France's biggest enemy? England, right? So they're kind of going to want to support anybody who's going up against England and hoping that they are going to win, right? Okay. So real quick, I just want to show you, when we think about the colonists going to war with England, look at all the advantages that England has. I mean, the army is made up of professionals. If you were in the British Army, that was your job. So you were professionally trained. They've got all the factories to make war materials and weapons that they need. They've got all the money. Y'all, at the time of the American Revolution, a third of the colonists were still loyal to England, and another third were neutral or didn't even care. So fully 2/3 of the colony's population either supported England or didn't care anything about going to war, okay? So that was kind of a bummer, right? So the only disadvantages that we can really see for the British Army was that they had a long way to come, like across the Atlantic, with all of their soldiers and weapons and supplies and everything else, right? The English soldiers didn't really have an emotional investment in the war. It was their job. They were told to go over there and fight, so they did. But when you're emotionally invested, it means a lot to you, right? And also because they weren't fighting any wars on their own territory. So they weren't familiar with the territory in the colonies, okay? Now, looking at what the advantages were for the colonists, they had a great leader in George Washington. They were fighting on their home ground. They were emotionally invested, right? But on the other end, right, poorly equipped, poorly trained. The soldiers would desert at will, no money to fight the war, an inexperienced government in the colonies who has no idea what to do, right? So you can see what the disadvantages were. On paper, it doesn't look good for the colonies. So again, like I said, and we're going to go into some more detail about the wars and when France enters the war to help us and that kind of thing. But just remember that France is going to be America's greatest ally, okay? And then, like I said, later on, the Netherlands will give us our first loan. But Benjamin Franklin goes over to France, and he is meeting with the King of France and the nobles and his government officials, and he's whining and dining and schmoozing with them, trying to get the king to agree to help. And when he finally does, okay, later on in the war, France is they're gonna come to play. They're gonna bring muskets and weapons and powder for guns and forces, and they're gonna bring money, and they're gonna bring their French Navy. So when we talk about who was our best friend during the American Revolution, that would be France. So now I was telling you about Benjamin Franklin going over there, and the French loved Benjamin Franklin, okay? They saw him as this kind of like wilderness frontierman, kind of like wild, and he played on that, right? He wore this fur cap all the time when he was in France, and the French people just thought he was so, just kind of like a mountain man, or kind, wild. Anyway, so he did that. Just as a real quick pointer, we'll talk about the Battle of Saratoga more in another lesson, but it's during the Battle of Saratoga that's when the French decide they're going to support us. When the colonists win the Battle of Saratoga, France says, okay, we agree, we are going to support you, and they send their navy, and they send, weapons and do all of that. We'll talk about Battle of Saratoga later, but that's the turning point in the war, because that's when the French decide to help us, okay? So I was telling you about John Adams going over too. John Adams does go over, and he first goes to France. The French did not like John Adams very much. John Adams is kind of a cut and dried guy. I don't have time to wine and dine and schmooze you. Are you going to help us or not? Time's wasting. I need an answer. Well, the King of France did not like that very much. So John Adams was not liked very much in France. So what happens is they end up sending him to the Netherlands. And he's going to the Dutch, who are very wealthy merchants and bankers. And he's saying, hey, will you give us a loan? And at first, the Dutch are like, I don't think so. Your little piddly militia against the most powerful army in the world, yeah, you're going to lose, dude. So at first, the Netherlands don't want to give us a loan. But when we finally win the war, okay, right before we sign the treaty ending the Revolutionary War, the Dutch decide they will give us a loan. And they do, in about $2 million of today's money, okay? They give us our first loan, and this is going to help us to eventually get on our feet and establish our government and start paying off some of that war debt.